ahead and get started? Yes? Wait.
Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So I am Bethany. I am here to talk today a little bit more like logistics of how to write mentor training awards. Typically, I think of like K or F series, also the TL1 and KL2 for frontiers. I'm still navigating technology, so bear with this. Okay, here's a quick overview of the day. By the day, I mean like the next hour with us. So I'll give a quick intro about myself, kind of get experiences from those in the room. I can talk the whole time. I don't necessarily want to, but I think it's also helpful, like as you're going through the mentee or the mentor side of grant applications to hear others' experiences. So there's some time for that. Just a quick review of like the main components. Not spending too much time on that, and then talking about the steps that I think are really important between the mentor and the mentee as you develop these grants. Starting with those initial conversations, the writing process, and then kind of that follow-up process. So experience in the room. So a quick little bit about me. I am an exercise physiologist by training. So think like cardiac rehab. Someone has a heart attack, they go and have to go get exercise. That's me. And so with that in mind, our little like guy today is a little runner walker. Also feel free to stand up and like walk around the room. You've probably been sitting all day in the conferences. You're probably like just finishing up your meals. I'm completely okay with you guys walking around. I'm usually that person in the back. So that won't bother me at all. But my experiences with these F and K awards, I did my postdoc at KU Med starting in 2020. I started in January. I submitted an F32 in August. So what, 8 months later? And then very, very quickly, I got a score of 42, which is not quite fundable, but it was discussed, which is always a positive. And then very, very quickly resubmitted in December, which I would not recommend. I'm happy to talk about that experience. And that one did receive a fundable score in the end. During that same time when that was under review, I also submitted a TL1 award to Frontiers. And then I also received that, but then because I got the F, we switched. And then just over a year ago, I transitioned into a faculty position at KU Med in the Department of Physical Therapy, Rehab Sciences, and Athletic Training. And then since then, I've submitted a KL2 award and then also a KL1 award. So I've had a handful of experiences with these mentored awards as a mentee and PI of the grants. And I've also submitted a handful of other grants as like co-Is, a few pilots as PI. So all that to say, I'm definitely not the expert of grant writing or grantsmanship in the room, but also showing them my experiences as the mentee and just having honestly really, really good experiences with my mentors. So if I'm sharing an experience, you're like, wow, you have a great mentorship team. A, I do. But B, if you're not having that same experience, that's completely valid. I have heard some really rough experiences between mentors and mentees. And so I think part of this is trying to help get everyone on the same page to have a good or successful experience. So real quick, I know people are still eating, but I want to get a feel for who is in the room, who has submitted as like the PI or the mentee an F or a K or a TL1 or the KL2 awards. Awesome. Who's been a mentor on some awards? And they're everyone planning on submitting. Okay, very cool. Awesome. And then anyone else that wants, if you are not a mentor or mentee, like anyone want to share like why you're in the room so I can like help address your roles? Just here for hostage support.
No.
Yeah.
I am starting my PhD program this summer,
Yeah.
so this will be something that I'll be doing down the road.
Oh, totally. Yeah. This could probably also apply to like your PhD process. Yeah.
Possible future mentee.
Okay. Cool. I apologize. I'm going to try to like not to hide behind this podium. Some of the stuff can't move, so I'm going to have to come to it regularly. So I just want to give a quick review of the F and the K component. And so in case you're unaware, the F32 is postdoc NIH award for research, and then there's a bunch of different Ks. case series I'll probably talk to. And so I'm primarily focusing on K1, but most of this information is agnostic to your K mechanism. And the K award is for early career faculty. So these are two quotations from the NIH, from different NIH sites and institutes about the purposes behind the F and the K awards. And each institute will use these awards a little bit differently. If you're clinically trained, you might be going for a K23 or a K08. As a PhD, I go for, I think, the K01. It's the only one I can go for. So there's different reasons and you might be choosing different mechanisms. And again, I'm not quite going into that. But from these definitions, what kind of comes out to you guys as reasons for pursuing these like mentored awards? Yeah, you can shout it out.
Oh, okay. So become independent?
Yeah.
I have a question though.
Go ahead.
Why, as a PhD, can you only go for K01? Why not K99?
Oh, you can go for a K99. So for those in the room who don't know, the K99 is a special type of award. That's like the one that like maybe doesn't always apply to this, but I still think it can apply. And I do talk a little bit about that in one. So the K99 is a special type of K award. You apply for it as a postdoc, even though most other Ks, all other Ks, are for early career faculty. So you apply for the K99 during your postdoc. I think it's a 2 or 3 year award as the 99. And then you apply for jobs across wherever you're applying to. You're supposed to get a competitive job offer. And then if you have a competitive offer that the NIH approves of, you get the ROO, which is another 2 or 3 years. I think it's 5 years total. I forget like which way is which.
It's 2 and then 3.
2 and then 3, perfect. And then you get 3 years on this ROO, which helps to start your research in your early career position. So it's essentially like a little bit earlier of the K award, starting a little bit early during your postdoc. And it helps us to make a possibly smoother transition to faculty. Okay, I forgot what your question was. I was sorry talking. Yeah, so to me, purpose of mentored awards is to give that like the training to support your research and support your training. Yours being the mentee or the applicant or PI, I'll use all those words interchangeably. And really the NIH is investing in you to become an independent investigator. Do you have a question? Okay, sorry. I want to make sure you skip. If you have questions, feel free to put them on now. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about all the different grant components. There's a lot of great resources out there. Talking about how to write these grants, talking about what all the components are. You can look at the directions on the NIH website for all the different components. I just want to show you guys, there's a lot that goes into each sort of grant. So this is an F32. And all of this together, I think these are all the main scored items. And the scoring for mentored awards like XAK are different than like a R level award or R series award. They focus a lot more on like the applicant, how strong the applicant is, how strong your mentorship team is, what your training plan is, along with your science. So this is about 30 pages of writing that you get to do. This does not include the human subjects components, does not include the data management and sharing plan. So there's a lot that goes into it. And on this, I'll quick highlight on the piece of it again. So you have your applicant background. So talking about you, talking about what kind of training you want to get, your specific aims, and then your research strategy. That's the significance, innovation, approach. Each of those are 6 pages in the F. If you are interested in K awards, here's the sections for the K award components. Very, very similar to the F. This is a little bit longer, about 40 pages. The main difference in this, well, there's lots of differences, but really main difference here, that candidate information in the background, along with that research strategy, is a combined total of 12 pages. So if you're like, man, I have a lot of training to explain, you can front load those 12 pages and say like your background and your goals are going to be 8 pages. But then that only leaves you 4 pages for your research strategy, or vice versa. If you're like, I have a lot to explain in my research components, backload that. You can put like 10 pages if you want to on the research strategy and 2 pages into that candidate background. I don't recommend that. All the examples I've seen and the examples in my program was 6 and 6, but you have that ability to move things around. Like, I can't cut this anymore. Totally fine. And again, Frontiers is hosting today's research day. So I wanted to highlight their awards. Theirs is a little bit different than the K awards, just inherently in the writing of it. It's a lot shorter, which is for better and for worse. So you have a letter of intent that's due in the fall time. Different awards, again, the TL1 is for the postdocs. The KL2 is for the early career researchers who have a faculty position. Specific to Ames 1 page, that's the same research strategy. You only get 4 pages here. And NIH kids usually get like 6. And then the personal statement, you get 2 pages. And that's like your background, what your training goals are, and how you're going to go about that training. And then typical other things, the bio sketches for everyone, letters of support from your mentor, and coworkers. So yeah, I really just breezed through that so we can all get on the same page for like what goes into this grant component. So going on to the organizing your thoughts and like pre-writing. And so I really think from my experiences and from experiences of others, having like multiple conversations over and over again with mentors is really, really important before you even start writing. And so the initial conversations, like setting like the groundwork of like, why are you even applying for this award? Are you a postdoc? It's expected that you apply for it? Are you, and like therefore you just have to, are you a postdoc that is like really excited to apply for this? And you really want to like invest your time in this process? Getting both the mentor and the mentee expectations on the same board, on same page with that process. Again, as you move into like your early career position, do you as a faculty member need to cover a percentage of your salary? And so you need this like grant. There's maybe a little bit, or there can be a little bit less investment potentially as you transition to an early career individual to find a mentor to help support you these K awards. I think good mentors will always support you, but it might be hard to say like, hey, like I want to do this training, I want to go in this area, like I think you should be great for this reason. And so that's one of the things as you start approaching your, as the mentee and applicant and PI of the grant, you need to know like broadly the direction of your grant and your research and why you want your mentors on your grant. They are on there because they have some expertise in the area and they're going to provide you training. They might just connect you with a whole different group of people. Something like that. They're going to train you on some specific technique or teach you about a whole new area of research. So as you go in thinking about your research and like why you want to apply for this grant, as the applicant or PI, you also need to have like a broad idea for like what you want to look at. And that can be pretty broad going in, I would say. For my F32, my mentor studied, I knew going into this, my mentor studied pediatric obesity, and I had done work in that area. I said, okay, like this is a pediatric obesity grant. And that was pretty broad. And I said, okay, like I have these skills and this knowledge, how can I combine that with potential future training to move my career forward? As the mentor, I think you, as you go into like initial conversations, you need to know what your own qualifications are. From what I have observed and also heard, a mentor of an F or a K needs to have their own R-level funding. Likely, probably best to have it to be current, or like if you had multiple grants before, it might be okay not to have a completely current grant. Try on the more K side. You also need to have a successful track record of trainees, whether that's postdoc fellows or early career faculty. You need to be able to show that you have successfully transitioned people into the next stage or help them get the next level, whatever that means in your field. I think a good mentor, again, will support the applicant. That might mean if like you're a postdoc or if you are, I guess even an early career faculty, helping to give them the time to write this grant, because these take a long time to write all different components and to think through what you're actually writing about and what you're doing. And that's during the award. Once you actually get the award, you also need time. And the grants theoretically buy out and like give you protected time to do your research and your training. That's not always what happens either. And so in that process, again, as your mentor, supporting the applicants, their change in their roles. So again, I've heard of situations where a mentor had a postdoc and the postdoc was doing a lot of like the mentors like leg lifting for their R level, for their R01. The postdoc got to the F32, which is phenomenal. And then the mentor goes, well, wait, you need to keep working on my project. And it's like, no, like they just bought out all of their time to work on their project and further their stuff. And so again, having those conversations early, like what does that look like? Like, will the PI need to then hire, the R01 PI need to hire another faculty or another research coordinator or research assistant to help cover that change in the workload? Again, just all important things to think about. So then once you kind of have those, like, why are we doing this together? Will you be a mentor? Like broad topic. You get to start actually planning the grant, which is maybe, I think, the best part about this whole thing is just like thinking like, what could I do with this? So I think it's really important to have an agreed on timeline. And I would recommend having that be fairly specific to each of the documents. And I'll have example timelines at the end of this, showing my own timelines, and then also someone else from University of Massachusetts, their recommended timelines. But agreeing on a timeline for when certain documents are done, if you're going to use an external reviewer, when you need to get that done. That can just help, I think, ease a lot of tension and accountability on all sides. So again, as that PI or the applicant mentee that's submitting this grant, you need to know how this grant is going to fit into your research program. It has to also fit with like your mentors, the training, the research, but like as a mentee, where do you want to go? Like, what's your dream R01? And then what sort of information do you need? Or like, what sort of training or pilot data do you need in order to get there? And kind of working within those confines. That being said, from personal experience, you might have some really big ideas for what an R01 should be. It's maybe unrealistic expectations. So the mentor side of that then is really reining that in and focusing the scope of the project and making sure it's a realistic and feasible project to get done in the 2 to 5 years. The postdoc awards, the Fs, are typically 2 to 3 years. The K awards typically 5 years. So making sure you can get all the work done and the training done in that amount of time. As you're developing the scope of the project and your research questions, the applicant really needs to know the literature. And so you might be learning about a whole new area of literature. And you probably are, because you're looking for training in some areas, which is one of my problems with these grants, is that you're applying for training. You have to like do a lot of front leg work of like understanding what all things mean or how to analyze them or whatever it is early on. And then you also need to know how NIH works. Just broadly of, okay, I need to submit this to an institute. What does that even mean? Where do I go? Where do I find this information? I recommend, I'll just bring this up later on, emailing the program officer or the PO. So again, finding that information. I always love the saying, like, ask 3 before me. I really encourage individuals, the mentees, to look in, like, try to find the information that you're looking for online. NIH websites can be really exciting to navigate. All the RFAs or the directions can be really exciting to also navigate, but try and figure it out on your own, and then being able to go to your mentor and be like, hey, I looked for this and I can't figure it out. And it can show that you are putting initiative into this grant as well. And then on the mentor side, along with this, as the applicant and you are figuring out the scope of the project and potential trainings, they need to be connected to other co-mentors. I think that can be really helpful. They don't know who they don't know. Also, as a mentor, hopefully you're an established person in your field, and you have a lot better connections, and maybe some of the top people in the field. So working with that and connecting them to co-mentors. And then I think this is actually a role or responsibility of both, but figuring out, getting some other previous successful examples. I'm guessing that the mentor has either previous examples from past mentees, or they have friends or colleagues who have had previous successful mentees. But also as an applicant, I am pretty shameless. I will go on NIH Reporter, which is where you can like find like other grants that have been funded, and I will find similar-ish people in similar roles with similar grant mechanisms and say, hey, saw you have this. Would you mind sharing your grant? That doesn't always work. Although I think there is a way to like go in and like actually get the grant. It's public knowledge when it's funded. But most people are willing to share like components of the grants, which is really helpful. And then the final section for, again, just like the working through things before writing, or before writing things fully down, is this 3x3 table that my mentor, Ann Davis, like always talks about. And I like, took me a while to get sold, but it really does help. So the 3x3 table, it's only 3 here because of my mentors, or like however many mentors you would have a column for each of them. So you have your primary mentor and then each of the co-mentors. And then each mentor should be giving you a unique area of training. I'll give you my example from my F32, which, yeah, I'll show you in a second. So each mentor should be giving you a unique area of training, and then you need to be able to connect that area of training to your actual research questions that you're asking. And so having this all in one table, I think really helps reviewers to say, oh, hey, I see this plan. I see where this is going. I get why this training is occurring. It's really helpful. So that being said, here is my table from my F32. What did I miss in here?
Aims.
Yeah, didn't include the aims. Didn't include, and to be fair, I think a lot of people, the 3x3 table is like a very nice idea, and if you can do it well, perfect. This was my table I submitted. I have my mentors and co-mentors and collaborator up here, and then all of my training and who is doing what training. Yes. So as I was thinking through like giving this presentation, I was like, well, this is a terrible example. I was like, well, this is a real life example. So I think I had 2 aims for my F32. And my mentor helped provide the study design for my aim 2, my main mentor. The sedentary behavior analysis and the energy intake were outcomes for my aim 1. The slow analysis was for my aim 1 and for aim 2. And then implementation science and qualitative research was all my aim 2. So really, if I wanted to like help follow through with that 3x3 table, even if I didn't like, it just seemed very messy to do. Like, oh, like this is for aim 1, this is for aim 2. And like you probably could add another row at the bottom and say like, corresponds to aim 1, corresponds to aim 2. You can also color code this differently and say like, hey, like highlight everything that's for aim 1 in a certain color, highlight everything for aim 2 in a certain color, and if it applies to both aims, do a third color. So just again, trying to communicate succinctly to your reviewers how this all fits together is very helpful. And I will also say I started off with this kind of table for my KO1 award, and then due to spacing, I cut it out and shifted it to a different sort of figure. So I'm giving this, but I still think that 3x3 table, even just talking through it and knowing how everything connects is very, very helpful, because it'll help the writing process be so much more smooth. Okay, so then before moving on to writing, this is like a quick check, like, do we have an understanding of why the mentor and the applicant are like applying for these, or the applicant's applying for this award, and like what the mentor's role in that is? Other agreed on timelines, and then do you have like the 3x3 table, like the broad ideas of like, here are the aims, here's like my training, and here's who the co-mentors will be. So moving into the actual writing stage responsibilities, and before even going here, does anybody have any questions, comments, other experiences?
So
Yeah.
the idea, like as a trainee, so the idea of the application should be overlap with the mentors, or just totally different.
That's a great question. So the question was, as like the trainee, does your research need to overlap with the mentor? I think it's gonna be different for the F awards than for the K awards. So I think for the F award, you cannot do a clinical trial with F awards if you're doing human subjects research. And so it's most helpful to have it's a quick timeline, it's 2 years, right? So I think it's most helpful to have a mentor who already has research ongoing or has data collected. And so you can't ask the same research questions, but somehow using their data and answering different questions with that. So they need a strong overlap. But that being said, I think you can also just use people for their knowledge in an area and get training in that area and have that be an outcome. So the research does not necessarily need to overlap. So for my F, I worked with Dr. Deb Sullivan, and she is a great researcher in like nutrition. And I used that to like understand like, what are my nutrition outcomes? For my K award, I think you can deviate some with your Ks. Are you sure okay? Because you actually have time and a little bit of money to do some data collection and clinical trials of your own. So my primary mentor on that is very much in my same area, broadly. But then I have other mentors. So I'm floating an adaptive intervention for my K. So my mentor who's training me on adaptive interventions, I do pediatric obesity work. Her work is in like communication science disorders and works with like early intervention because it's autism and trying to identify them a little earlier. So I'm just using her for her experience in like a methodology. So that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have kind of a comment.
Go ahead.
I feel like the 3x3 table or like a version of it could be helpful not just for your specific grant that you're writing, but I could see it also being very helpful in your overall career.
Oh, yeah.
Just taking the time to say, all right, here's my mentor who's helping me with whatever. Here's my mentor who's helping me with whatever. I think that would be helpful too. So just maybe you already do that, but maybe you don't.
It was just an idea too, but that is a good example. Like the amount of times that you're given. I've done trainings now and got the F32, and so the amount of times you've been like, okay, like, well, I've done this training with this person that led to like this research outcome or this sort of analysis of this sort of result, and this is where that's going next is very helpful to have, and how that all fits in with like your grand broad plan of life.
Yeah.
And by life I mean just training.
Professionals.
Yeah. Okay. So when we actually get to the writing stage, for better or for worse, as the applicant, this is the heavy lift of you. I firmly believe that applicants should be writing all grant components on their own. That includes the actual grant submission, the grant components, but also like the letters of support, the letters from the mentors. There's a lot of different components in that grant. Everyone is very busy. I think as an applicant, you likely have a little bit more restricted time. With that. I think you can always ask for examples, for support, or like the letters of most of the support from your mentors too, or like community members. And they will probably go through and they probably have examples and they might heavily revise based on what they think sounds good or what they know sounds good. Again, you need to keep reviewing the literature, make sure that like you're catching everything, and adhere to that agreed on timeline. I found it very helpful to have regular meetings with my primary mentor and also regular meetings with co-mentors if you can. Being able to like bounce ideas off of someone or verbally talk through what you're trying to say is very helpful for me. There's so many times I'll jump on a call and say like, you just need to listen to me, I just need to talk through what's going on. And that kind of helps me personally. But yeah, having those regular meetings is very, very helpful. And I think as a mentee, you need to go on to initiate those. People might check in on you every once in a while, but it depends on how close you are to that primary mentor or the co-mentors. And sorry, I should have explained before in case you guys don't know. So on these awards, you have a primary mentor, the person that's responsible for like all of your training and all your research, and then you have like a specific area of training. But you also have co-mentors provide other aspects of training. So it's usually between like 2 and 5 people. You can't have too few, you can't have too many. I have always done like 3 or 4. Not saying that's right or wrong, it's just like what seems to do well within NIH. I also think early on in this process, once you get a solid draft of your aims page, emailing that and your personal bio sketch and then your primary mentor's bio sketch to the program officer at NIH with the institute you want to go to, saying, hi, applying for this after this K, very interested. Does this fit your like research agenda? and they might say, no, please go somewhere else. And I have received that email as some of my friends. Someone might say like, hey, yeah, this is very interesting. I don't like your A1. And you can choose to modify it, or you can keep charging ahead. Whatever you want. They are not also people who fund you. They don't review your grant, but they are your contact once the grant is awarded. And they also have an idea of like what does get funded. So sometimes their input can be valuable. The mentor here, mentors roles, I think really providing extensive edits, especially mentors of F32 awards. These grants are likely the applicants' first NIH grants that they're submitting. And you don't know what you're doing. Like you can look at examples. I had submitted my F32 and I went through a grant writing class that Dr. Ellerbeck and Dr. Richter taught. And I was like, oh, they would like went through like each component like what's for. I was like, oh, that's what that code's for. I just had tried to figure out what I was writing about based on all of their examples. So I think as a mentor providing extensive edits, you have to go through multiple rounds of revisions in that process. And it can be very time intensive. And I think providing direction on like what they're supposed to be writing about, and then also maybe changing some language to be more succinct and more like grant-esque style. And then the mentor too in this process, adhering to that agreed upon timeline, providing edits back in a timely manner. Again, that's what that's with the caveat that the applicant, that mentee, is actually getting you documents on time, and just trying to fit those, work with them, they agreed on timeline. So I kind of alluded to it a second ago, there's co-mentors in these grants. So they can still provide a really big role, depending how close you are with them, depending how much training you need from them. And so co-mentors roles in this process. Sometimes as the mentee, again, you're like, oh, I want training in qualitative analysis. This is my example. And I know nothing about qualitative analysis. So you have to like read up on it in order to say like, oh, like here's the analysis plan, like here's how I like actually do this in the approach. So it's helpful to have a few meetings with that mentor to like understand what's going on in that process of like, is this right? You might not always know like the ideal training opportunities or which trainings are viewed as like really highly or less valuable. So I think being able to ask that mentor like, hey, do you have ideas for a training? It can be really helpful. Also, I think that co-mentor should provide at least one round of edits, ideally for the whole grant, but specifically for their sections, like, oh, like this paragraph is on you and like why you are ideally the ideal mentor for my training. And so I think making sure that they're reading through some of it. That being said, life happens. And again, depending on your co-mentors, like level investment, they might not have time or capacity. But ideally, you'll find someone that does. And I also have not. I've had co-mentors that I've never read my whole grant. So don't be shocked if that happens. Again, it's ideal if they do, but it's likely they don't. And then I think this is really important, really, really valuable, is getting an external reviewer. So an external reviewer is someone who comes in, you have your whole grant done, like most of the main documents done, or all the main documents done, and you have gotten feedback from your mentor, your co-mentors, and then you send it up to someone else who's not your mentorship team. They can or they cannot know you, it doesn't matter. And they review your grant like they would an NIH reviewer. This person should be an expert in like your area of research, likely someone that has been a mentor on mentored awards, so the F or the K series, and ideally that they have also like been a part of review sessions of F and K at NIH, at least like been a part of the review sessions within NIH. Typically, you pay for these reviewers and for their expertise to review. Yeah, so a timeline for this, again, so like once all your documents are done, with both my grants, with my recent KO1, I can remember that very clearly. And I think it's also a better timeline, so I'm gonna tell you that one. So I think we got my documents to the external reviewer 8 weeks ahead of time. So this, unfortunately, within like week or two before Christmas. And then we gave them 3 weeks to review my grant. They sent back changes. They submit their like just overall review of my grant, and they sent it in a NIH format of like their kind of feedback. And then myself and my primary mentor then met with that reviewer just to like hear what their feedback was, to ask some questions of like what their edits were, figure out what we can be more clear on. And I think that's always really, really helpful. So for the mentor side, I'm mentor and mentee here. The mentor can really help connect you to reviewers, potential reviewers, especially for like those postdoc or F32 awards. Go.
This is the first time that you send your grants or
Mhm.
extra you pay.
Yeah.
Are they commercial available or?
There might be commercial ones. I'm not aware of them. Go ahead.
Yeah, so
They can run
just
for
jump
it.
in. So yes, there are commercial outfits that will do this. Depending on how their expertise, they might be really good or they might be really bad and just take your money. And that's the risk when you do an external review, because will you get a review? Yes. Is it going to be valuable and help you? That's always a problem.
Yeah.
So it's really important to find someone who's actually reviewed these before, and who's not currently, if they currently sit on a review study or study section, they can.
Mhm.
So you want to find, ideally you find somebody who's just stepped off that study section, and so they have some knowledge and they can share them. So, but most people that do it they do this like on the side, like they're academics and
Yeah.
they don't get paid enough, so they do extra work, right? Not that I know any academics who don't get paid enough, but, yeah.
How many reviewer should ask? Like if one is enough or more than one?
I think one is probably fine. So for my F32, asked one individual, and then also for my KO1, had one individual review. Again, just kind of get a new set of eyes on it. Like, is this making sense? Are we communicating well? What can we improve on in the last like month? Yeah. And even if you have like a friend or a colleague to review, like if you don't have money or you can't find someone who is an NIH level, like great reviewer, even having a friend or a colleague or your grandparents review and say like, does this make sense to you? Like, can you understand? That's also really helpful, I think. So the mentor might need to like recommend reviewers, and then also like recommend paying for the reviewer, especially for the postdocs. I think it's like, hey, mentee, you might have a few different other resources to go find support to help pay for external reviewers. As the applicant and the mentor, providing the NIH review documents to the external reviewer is really helpful. Again, K and F awards are scored a little bit differently than R level awards. It takes into account like the applicant and the mentorship team, and not just the science. So I think having that information is important and helpful. And then again, creating that agreed upon timeline for the reviewer. So my review for my K award, we sent it out middle of December. We gave that reviewer 2 or 3 weeks, just right after the holidays, to review the grant. We then met with them a few days after they sent the documents. I thought it was a really great review. We'll find out how it goes once my grant actually is reviewed. And then that left me, so I got my comments back, met with them by the beginning of January. That left me essentially like 1 more month to incorporate their reviews, send it out to all the mentors one more time for their eyes on it. And I'll finish up all the documents that I hadn't yet created, which you'll see in my example timelines. Yeah, go ahead.
One other point for K is, as as a K, you're a junior faculty member, so it's worthwhile to negotiate when you're getting your startup package, the external review as part of your startup package, right? It's not that much money, but it's going to pay dividends for you. So it's worthwhile to include that. And it also makes your department chair think that you're really smart and you know what you're doing when it comes to grants. So asking for this is a worthwhile thing in your startup ask.
Yeah. If you don't ask for it, you can still shamelessly ask. I asked Jake to pay my external review over. He was nice and said yes.
And it's not, do you remember how much it was? Like ballpark?
Mine was, I think, $500. I asked $750. I asked my external reviewer. So I think for my F32, I might make this number up a little bit. I think that was $500 that we paid them. And it was like a friend of my mentor who was very well known in NIH. And she was qualified to do that. And then for this one, for the external review for my K, I found them on my own through like a connection. And I said like, hey, would you review? What's your going rate? And I think they said between like 500 to 1,000. And so we said 750. I just don't know if he's like submitted his documents. So I know, but maybe he's free. We don't know.
No idea.
Okay. So we're getting towards the end of this. So again, just like that quick check before you submit, like, hey, do you have all your documents actually written? Your fully written grant with agreed on training aim and training plan. So once you submit to this NIH, like this is like, if they fund it, like, hey, like this is what you said you were going to do, like you need to actually do that. So making sure that like all your co-mentors are actually, and your mentors are actually willing to like train you on this. That's like, that they're willing to actually meet with you. I mean, hopefully you developed a good rapport during this process, but again, you hear some crazy stories sometimes of people who don't get along well with their mentors and co-mentors. And so developing that like individualized training plan, like your training and like your research plan, like your oral grant timeline, and making sure that everyone agrees to that is really, really important. And then having a plan for resubmission. Are you, you can kind of have an idea of this plan before going into before you submit, or you can develop it after it's submitted and you find out how that goes. From my experience, it is very rare for an F or a K to get awarded on the first time. I've heard of one instance so far. So I think expect to resubmit. I think they want to, I think they as an NIH wants to just like see you work through that resubmission process and just like rethink and figure out how to respond to reviewers. That's ultimately, for better and for worse, going to set you up in the future when you have to submit your R-level grants, just to build up that tenacity, I think a little bit. And you don't always have to resubmit to NIH. You can maybe submit it to a different institute or a different organization like American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, whatever makes sense within your field. You can also take components of it and then submit that to the Frontiers TL1 or KL2 components or TL1, TL2 programs, if that is applicable to you. Oh. Okay, so any questions, thoughts, experiences from the groups that you guys have and want to share at all? Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I think is incredibly important to keep in mind when you're writing your K or an F is the importance of letters of support.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let draft a letter of support to give your mentors and not to just say, hey, can you write me a letter and assume they're going to hit everything that you want them to hit. It's much better off for you to write an incredibly strong letter for yourself, which is very abnormal, but it's an incredibly important thing to do, and match it to what you want. You give it to them, say, any edits, please, thank you. Mm-hmm. You're doing two things. You're making sure that the letter is applicable to what you're writing, the actual research and training plan, and also you're minimizing the amount of time that your mentor needs to put into this letter. So and that's something that I didn't understand until I got in review committees and started seeing these letters. They're really good, and that's what it is. It's these people writing their own letters.
What do you think is included in a really good letter? What components?
You want to see, I would go back to the 3x3 plot.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
And essentially making sure that the letter for that mentor is mapping what goes on for the training grant, the training aim, the research aim, the resources you have, highlighting the number of trainees that they've had, all those things. That's what I think you want to do to take the time and maximize it.
I agree. I also think, so in like your background sections of the grant, where you talk about like yourself and then like what kind of training aims you want, and like who your mentors are for that, you like very quickly will write like Bethany has X number of publications. This mentor has this many grants. This mentor has mentored this many mentees. You kind of highlight it there. I always reiterate that again in their letter of support, showing like why they're a good mentor. My F32, my two mentors already are pretty good working relationship established by KO1. The mentors are slightly all over the board. And so I also used the letters of support to help convey like how they knew me, why they were invested in me as a researcher, and running a little more like that personal touch component, very, very briefly, because you don't have a lot of space. Again, I think you have 6 pages for your K award. I'm not sure if there's a page limit for your F. I'm sure it's the same thing. But again, just provide a little bit more of the personal touch, adding in, how many grants they have, just reiterating how strong of a mentor they are, and then how strong of a candidate you are and why they are excited about you and your project. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned that you have to negotiate with your mentor in terms of giving you time
Mm-hmm.
for, right?
Mhm.
How do you convince them?
That's a good question. So the question is, how do you, if you need to negotiate for time, how do you convince them? I am very privileged and I haven't had to advocate too much for that. I think in that circumstance, the mentor doesn't care about the grant, or like they care about the grant, but like it's not a top priority for them, but it's a top priority for the applicant or the mentee. So I think saying like the benefits, like if I get this grant, like this will teach me grant writing skills and I can help support your grants and like support your grant writing. Since submitting my grants, my mentors, again, are very gracious. They pulled me onto their grants to like review their grants for them. Again, just like the minor checks or just like, is this making sense? So like you are a better understanding of like what the grant components are for that process. I think also showing that, like if I get this grant, then like I'll cover my own salary, or 75% of my salary if it's a K award. I think that can be a strong pull so that that person can get another trainee or coordinator, or research assistant, whatever it is. I think like the ultimate, hopefully the mentor is invested in like your training and like continuing on to lead the successful, productive research agenda. And that's just like one way to do it. Like this will show that I'm productive. Like I think a research across the board said like, yes, like grants are like one of the main ways that you show your productivity, that and like publications and probably like conference presentations too. So that's what I would recommend. Does anyone had to do that? Like to advocate for yourself on buying out time?
You teach? You still teach?
I have a very light teaching load. I'm very lucky.
You have to negotiate that or? Oh, okay.
I came into a position where like not a lot of teaching was needed. I think even in that, so I came in, my current position is 60% research. And I personally love writing grants because I'm very competitive and I want to win. And it's probably not the greatest thing to say. Like my competitive nature is like very, very competitive. And so like I maybe on the extreme end of like when I first started my position like a year ago, I submitted I think 5 or 6 grants in the first like 4 or 5 months. Like 3 as PI, 3 as co-I. And then I this past winterish time submitted the KL2 and the KL1. I also would not recommend doing the KL2 and the KL1 at the exact same time, but I can talk about that. People have questions on that later on.
Have you ever FOIA'd anyone?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Have you ever FOIA'd the Freedom of Information Act? Like when you requested grants, did you ever activate?
I haven't. I haven't thought about it for like one person because they did something very similar to what I was thinking, but like in a different population with a different outcome. But like their overall, essentially, they were like developing an intervention and then piloting it. And they were willing to share their aims page, but they were very hesitant to share anything else until the research was done. But yeah, have you?
Yes.
Is it so? It's so fascinating how people, I think it's fascinating how protective people are of their grants, especially if they're already funded. And I understand like some concerns about like, this is my work and this is what I'm doing, but like also you have to submit it to like, depending on the research, if you're in human subjects, you need to submit it to clinical trials. It's people know what you're doing anyways, but it's fascinating to me.
Well, I didn't know that. I thought that was the norm, was to.
Oh, that's super exciting.
Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
In order to request it, but then I found out that it's better to go ask the PI first to
Yeah.
request it, and then go through that route.
So, but again, some PIs will not share their documents, and so you go around the other way. I had a great running class during my PhD, and the professor of that class was like, "Oh yeah, if someone ever emails me, like, I'll email them the grant, like whatever." They're a very open, nice person, and like not very protective of their work. Like it's funded by the government. This isn't for everyone, and for the betterment of society. And then she mentioned in class, like, oh, if she ever gets like that request through like the Freedom of Information Act, she's like, well, I wonder why they just didn't email me to begin with.
Yeah.
And then she like sees like who they work with and like is like, this is interesting. But I've never done about that. Do you do it in like NIH Reporter? How do you do this?
How do you do it? Well, I just emailed, there's an office that you email and
Very cool.
it's related to NIH. So, I don't exactly remember, it's been a while, but I
Yeah.
haven't done it since then, but they do take out all the financial information.
Oh,
That's
that's
what they blacked out.
super exciting.
Yeah.
Things that I find the most exciting. That's a really good tip though. Yeah. Sorry, anyone else before we move on?
Yeah, how do you like generate the granular data? Especially, like I or that.
So technically, the F and the K awards do not need pilot data. Technically, however, from my experiences, they're reviewed better if you include like a little bit of pilot data. And so it can be like work that you did in your like doctoral or like graduate studies, saying like, hey, like I worked with this population broadly, like you can have a line in there from both sides. I've recruited within this population. So for my F, I developed aims off of, my aim one was using data from my mentor's current ongoing grant. So I just kind of used some of her pilot data, like use her like, hey, we have this many people in the study, this many people have like enrolled and consented, this many have completed through the treatment, and this many have completed like the measures. That was kind of really great. For my K award, it's a progression essentially from my F. And so I was able to say like, hey, so my K award is looking at kids who are not successful in their obesity treatments. So we have that obesity treatment. That was my F32. And I can say like, hey, like this many completed and like half of them, even though they were in the treatment group that was effective, they did not like maintain or lose weight. And so that was my pilot data. And I looked at a few of their like health behaviors too. You can ask your mentor and say like, hey, what kind of pilot data do you have? I think like any of your mentors, your primary or your co-mentors. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This will go quick. We have about, oh shoot, we only have like 5 minutes left. Well, it's fine. We have the super exciting timelines. So if you develop your timeline, the first thing to do is like look up when all the deadlines are. The F series, the initial submission and resubmission are the same dates. Fun fact. And then the K series, your initial submissions, and then your resubmissions like a month after like the initial submission deadline. That means that usually, so I submitted my K01 in February. I think it's going to get reviewed, I don't know, May or June. And then the council will decide to meet if it's funded, like come October. So with that timeline, I probably wouldn't, I could maybe resubmit in like November, but probably like March. Like expect like a whole year of a process in case you're not familiar with grants. So with that being said, again, I think you just need to have like, as you're building this timeline with your mentor, have like a goal submission. And if life happens and you need to bump it back to the next submission date, like that's hopefully okay. But have that built in. So this is an F32 timeline from a professor at the University of Massachusetts. And this is a beautiful, I will say like, this is like very like well organized, like timeline. It looks so nice. Again, I'm a huge advocate of like having those initial conversations. That's not in here. You can see here, they had their completed first draft 3 months out before it's due to NIH, a little over 3 months, 3.5, which is a very, I think, quick But I don't know that mentors like research or mentorship style. They're like research and like they might have like a cookie cutter approach. I also think like starting off, that 14 weeks out, like you'll have a specific aims page. I think my first aims page for my F32, I know this because I looked back at like old examples for you guys, like all of my dated documents. It took me a month and a half to get like a fully written aims page. And so I think thinking like, oh, like I'll have this done in a week. You might, but it also might be like a bunch of different iterations of drafts. So this is again, someone else's, the mentor, their timeline to things. Here is my actual timeline for my F32. So my initial conversations, I started in January of 2020, started kind of like broadly defining the topic, and then what data I would use. And by February, I like solidified the topic and kind of had my 3x3 table idea. I started my specific aims in February. FD is a full draft, and I tried to like mark like when final drafts actually came through. My like first draft of my specific aims was bullet points. I'm like, I think this is important to bring up. I think this is important to bring up. Here's like a sentence of my aims. And even that, as you're writing these grants, or like as your mentee is writing the grants, that's a really good starting point. I always support like getting things done. I've learned that I have a tendency to like delay my human subjects documents until after, it's like the very last final seconds before this is submitted, which, you know, they're not scored criteria, right? It's fine. So just kind of giving you an idea for my F32. So this took me 7 months to submit, but also remember that I work at KU Med, so the due to spot is like our sponsored program administration. Your institution, wherever you're at, is going to have a deadline before the actual NIH date to review it. Could be 1 or 2 weeks out, I'm guessing, maybe 3. Does anyone know what children's work visa is? I think it's like 2 weeks out. I'm wrong. Okay, so checking on that. And then here was my K01 timeline. So this one, I really actually had the idea for my K. A little over a year before I actually submitted it. I didn't have the wording exactly. And I like learned about adaptive interventions as I went. I started having initial conversations with my primary mentor in fall of 2022. So like, again, like a year and a half almost before I submitted. I met a co-mentor in person in like this past March. We had some great conversations and I pulled them in. I met another mentor of mine in the summer, pulled them in, and I just like slowly pulled people in as I was meeting with them. I was like, I like your work. Let's work together. And then started working on my aims page come late summer, probably like August or so. And even once I like create the final or full draft, I was revising it and editing up until probably the very end of things. So with that, we are actually out of time. I thought we were going to talk a lot. Real quick, in case you're taking pictures, some summary slides. Don't take pictures of all these. The applicant component or the mentee component, like here are things that you can be responsible for. Those initial conversations in the writing. On the mentor side, oh, wait a second. I'm also happy to share all these slides too. On the mentor side, some general like roles and responsibilities for you for the initial conversations and for the writing. And I think the next session is probably like starting in a minute. Huge thank you to all of my current mentors and people who supported my grants. And I also got some feedback from someone else who had received a K99 award. If you have any questions for me, or if you want to see the slides or see examples of my documents that I've submitted, feel free to. But yeah, thank you guys so much.